Friends, this is Steve Dupuie for the Bible News Prophecy Program with Dr. Bob Thiel, pastor and overseer of the Continuing Church of God. This is our debut broadcast on the European Gospel radio station, and we would like to take the opportunity to welcome you to the program and introduce ourselves. Dr. Thiel, why choose the European Gospel radio stations?
There are several reasons. We chose European Gospel Radio because it has both an AM radio presence and coverage, and also it has shortwave radio coverage. Plus, it has freedom of speech policies that we think are great so far. And it also has potential to be used in other parts of the world. So while we're originally starting in Europe, they have the capability of doing some things later over in Asia and perhaps South America and other parts of the world. And regarding the AM coverage from their AM station, European Gospel Radio told us that they cover northern and central Italy, southern Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Croatia, Slovenia, southern France, Germany. And they say they have something called DX reception that's been reported, so people have heard them in Spain, the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Finland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. And I mentioned about them having shortwave. Now with shortwave, what they sent us shows they cover the entire continent of Europe, but also parts of the Middle East and North Africa. So yes, will be getting the gospel, if you will, to parts of physical Israel, the nation of is called Israel, plus parts of North Africa. And so we think this is a way to get to some places that we haven't reached otherwise. And if it goes well with the shortwave, and we're getting the types of responses that we're hoping that we will get, we will therefore be able to cover more of the Eastern Hemisphere and perhaps expand into Asia and other places. Now, while in the United States, shortwave isn't that popular anymore, hundreds of millions of people around the world actually do listen to shortwave. Now, how many listen to this or not, we don't know, and we'll go there. Now, another reason we picked European Gospel Radio is there's not a lot of religious radio broadcasters in Europe. We did research, and this was, one, covered the most area, two, had the most open policies, three, had the only potential for growth. So it was really kind of very easy to make this particular decision. And the other thing I want to talk about was freedom of speech. We know big tech has been censoring our biblically oriented broadcasts at times, and they've basically been shadow banning us. And with the European Gospel Radio, we think we can deliver the Bible's message of the good news of the coming kingdom of God without having the types of censorship that we're having besides. Now, we haven't stopped doing what we were doing before. As a matter of fact, this particular radio broadcast is also going to be broadcast on the Bible News Prophecy channel on YouTube. We're on Brighteon, we're on Vimeo, we're on Daily Motion, Rumble, and one or two others that aren't coming to mind. So we're not doing that, but this is in addition to it.
That is certainly a large coverage area. Dr. Thiel, how frequently will the program be aired?
Okay, the one out of the European station is going to be on AM 4 days a week, which is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But for whatever reason, shortwave is only 3 days a week, and that'll be Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And for the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday broadcast, we have an elder in Serbia by the name of Aleksandar Sasha Veljic, and he'll be doing the broadcast out of Serbia, and it'll be, again, broadcast through the station in Italy, both the AM station and the shortwave station.
Will these broadcasts, including Elder Sasha's broadcast, be on the same time each week, as far as an hour goes?
Well, each week, yes, but each day, no.
Okay.
On this particular one that you and I are doing right now, this is scheduled to be broadcast on Mondays from 21:30 to 21:45 European Central Time, which is 9:45 to 9:30 to 9:45 p.m. And for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, with Elder Sasha on it, that's supposed to be from 20:30 to 20:45, which is from 8:30 to 8:45 p.m. Central European Time.
Very good. I've just made a note of those time frames. Dr. Thiel, why the name Bible News Prophecy?
There are a couple of reasons. The first is it conveys what our message is about. We cite the Bible a lot. We often tie current events in with the Bible, similar to what happened in Acts chapter 2. And we talk about prophecy, so the name fit.
Okay, what's the second reason?
The second reason actually has to do with YouTube. Back in 2012, when we decided to put video messages online at a YouTube account, you had to set up a Gmail account. Well, you could only have so many spaces, and the name Bible News Prophecy was the longest we could fit that made any sense to me and the rest of us. So it was the name of our first YouTube channel. And then we also have a magazine called Bible News Prophecy. So the same. And again, this particular broadcast is now Bible News Prophecy. So we've been using it now for multiple things. And we have a website, BibleNewsProphecy.net.
Can the listening audience obtain a subscription to your magazine, Bible News Prophecy?
Yeah, well, first of all, they can go to BibleNewsProphecy.net and they can read it. We have literature links over there, so they can read that. All of our back issues are also online, and they could also email a request in terms of getting physical copies, unless they're in certain parts of Africa. And in Africa, what happens is these are printed, magazines are printed in Africa for the Africans because of the basically postal costs and such. But if they're outside of Africa, yeah, they could send an email.
Excellent. Dr. Thiel, why choose radio as a venue for proclaiming the gospel?
Well, radio is a proclamation door that we can use to reach people we wouldn't reach otherwise. And actually, true Christians have been utilizing radio since the 1930s. The late Pastor General of the old Radio Church of God, then Worldwide Church of God, Herbert W. Armstrong, was invited to basically be a guest to do some kind of a prayer talk on radio one time. And he got great results, so great that the station manager contacted and said, "Hey, we'd like you on all the time." And so they went on the air and eventually became the Radio Church of God. But the other reason is, while people do have internet access in various parts of the world, not everybody does. And people don't just spend all their time on the internet. You know, some people do listen to the radio. I do when I drive, and sometimes at the house, and other people do as well. So we can reach and go through various doors, if you will, to proclaim the gospel. Now, in the book of Revelation, chapter 3, Jesus said to the Philadelphian Christians, said, "I know your works. See, I've set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. For you have a little strength, you've kept my word, and have not denied my name." And people say, "Well, what's this door got to do with?" Well, the open door for the Philadelphian Christians has to do with gospel proclamation. And I'd like to read a couple of passages that the Apostle Paul wrote, which confirms this. For example, in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, starting in verse 12, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Furthermore, when I came to Troas to preach Christ's gospel, a door was opened to me by the Lord." And in 1 Corinthians 16, starting in verse 8, the Apostle Paul wrote, "For I will tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a great and effective door has opened to me." So we see Paul talking about the open door has to do with gospel proclamation. And he wrote this, by the way, before Jesus's words were recorded in the book of Revelation. So early Christians had an idea before Revelation was penned that the open door had to do with proclaiming the gospel. And also, I want to read from the book of Acts, Acts chapter 14, verse 27. Now, when they had come and gathered the church together, they reported all that God had done with them and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. And there's a couple of relevance things here. First of all, being broadcast out of Italy, we will be reaching a lot of Gentiles. And, you know, in the Continuing Church of God, we go through Open Doors of Radio, but also with printed literature, through the internet, travel, personal contact. We actually are streamed online television, by the way, in Ghana. And we're reaching places like Africa and Europe, and places who have both Gentile descendants and Israeli descendants. And as far as reaching North America, by the way, I've been interviewed on the radio a couple hundred times on biblical and prophetic matters. Matter of fact, since mid-April, I've been on the Genesis Communication Network 17 times, and twice actually in the last week.
Okay, Dr. Thiel, we have about 3 minutes left. And so could you briefly give us what the history is of the Continuing Church of God? And I have many other questions for you, by the way.
Okay, well, so these are some of the questions we'll do in the next broadcast. But briefly, we trace our history back to the founding of the New Testament church in at Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. And we actually have a free book on the continuing history of the Church of God that you can find it. If you click on a link at BibleNewsProphecy.net. And throughout history, including in the book of Acts, Christians were called a variety of names, but they tended to call themselves Christian or Church of God. And turns out what I find interesting about church history is that the Greco-Roman Catholics and the Protestant churches, they'd say that our early leaders were saints, but they often have chosen not to follow many of the same teachings that we do. So that being said, the Continuing Church of God formally declared that name in 2012. I've been part of other Church of God groups since the 1970s, and we trace these groups all the way back to the churches in Antioch, Asia Minor, and Jerusalem in the 1st and 2nd centuries.
Would you consider yourself, or the Continuing Church of God, Roman Catholic or Protestant?
No. It's interesting because if you look through the ancient literature, it was the Church of God in Smyrna that was the original Catholic Church, if you want to do that. And also it was in Antioch and Jerusalem and other parts of Asia Minor where the first bishops or pastors were. Roman Catholic scholars say they didn't have any bishops for sure until sometime in the middle of the 2nd century, whereas those type of positions were actually being filled in the Church of God back that time. As far as Protestants go, we predate the Protestant Reformation, and I think we put a higher emphasis on Scripture than tradition than they do. We're also not LDS because we don't accept the Book of Mormon, and we're not part of the group calling themselves Jehovah's Witnesses because we teach Christians are supposed to keep the 10 Commandments.
Okay, in our final closing minute here, Dr. Thiel, if not Roman Catholic or Protestant, how then would you classify the Continuing Church of God?
Christian and biblical. We hold to the original Christian faith. And again, we have literature that proves that. You don't have to take our word for it.
Dr. Thiel, in closing, could you give us and our listeners some hint what future biblical prophecies you intend to explore based on current events?
Well, we're going to talk about prophecies that affect different countries in Europe, in Africa, North America, Asia, around the world, 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, things like 666, what's going on in the Middle East, as well as God's loving plan of salvation.
Thank you, Dr. Thiel. That concludes our program for today. For more information, please visit us at BibleNewsProphecy.net. This is Steve Dupuie with the Bible News Prophecy Program.